This house believes education kills entrepreneurship. We will first invite the first speaker of the proposition, which from Oxford University is Francesca Wallen, and the same speakers that are going to start are going to sum up for the team at the end, obviously the opposition first, followed by the proposition. Francesca.
What exactly do we mean by education, entrepreneurship, and in this debate, what do we mean by kills? So firstly, education. So for the proposition in this debate, education means time that is spent in a formal education as we would all recognize it in a school or a college or a university that's being taught by professional educators to a curriculum and being examined in the subjects that you are being taught in, regardless of what those subjects might be. It involves spending time in lessons or lectures or classes and tutorials, depending on what level you're at, and then sort of doing work throughout the year and being examined at the end. And we hope that that is not something that side opposition will contend. What then do we mean by entrepreneurship? Because that is a little trickier, and I am therefore incredibly thankful to my colleague from St Xavier's College who provided me with a quote from one of her revision sessions for her entrepreneurship exam. This is a quote from Joseph A. Schumpeter, which describes entrepreneurship as creative destruction. And I really like this as a definition, because to me, entrepreneurship is about, in some ways, destroying the way that we currently conceive of the world, the way that we currently conceive of problems, and making for yourself as an individual a niche that the longer that they remain in the education systems as they exist today, they are losing some of the skills and some of the mindsets and some of their understandings of the world that will make them better entrepreneurs. They are sacrificing some of their entrepreneurship by staying in education, or the things you need to be a good entrepreneur. I mean, the first one is simply time. WhatsApp wasn't developed in 5 minutes, sort of on the back of a postcard and then sent off to be done, right? It took time, it took interrogation, it took thinking, and it took development. But also, I think that there is an element of time in terms of the time in your life. Young people are innovators. Young people see the world differently. They have not yet had their worldview shaped. So there is an element of being youthful that we think is often important to the start of an entrepreneur's career. The second thing you need is world experience, and a diversity of world experience, an understanding of all of the world around you, how it's shaped, how it is formed, to find that bit of it that you want to change, that niche that you want to build and create. Often entrepreneurs do fail. Ideas don't take off immediately. They need revision and they need thinking. But you need to be able to take that risk. You need to be able to look at your idea and say, yes, it didn't work this time, but I'm going to work out why. I'm going to make it better, and I'm going to make it happen because I believe in this and I believe in myself. That resilience is incredibly important. And finally, you need a streak of rebelliousness. You need to be happy to not conform. You need to be happy to destroy in order to create the new and wonderful and innovative things that none of us in this room, or perhaps some of us in this room, but certainly myself, cannot even begin to consider that in the future we will see as invaluable as our telephones, as our computers. And so I'm very proud to propose.
We'll ask the leader of the team speaking against the motion to oppose the motion from Cambridge University, Thomas Simpson.
Do you know what my favourite part of Chessie's speech was? It was when she raised the example of Mark Zuckerberg, a man who was able to make his idea catch off within the confines of Harvard College. But more to the point, he actually was a guy who attended graduate-level classes in computer programming while he was at high school, and furthermore made the connections that he needed in order for his idea to be able to catch off while he was at university. Even if he dropped out, this was a man who benefited hugely from formal education and furthermore from all of the experience he was able to gain as a result of that more broad education. So even though we have a view of these mavericks who drop out of college, that's not indicative of how these people live out their lives and whether education is relevant to their lives. So see, for example, Bill Gates. He was a guy that we remember for dropping out of college and pursuing his dream of founding Microsoft. But instead, if you look at his educational history, he attended one of the most elite preparatory schools in the United States, one of the few which actually had a computer at the time he was attending, and was able to gain the experience of programming in a way that few others were able to. Furthermore, at college, he was able to meet people like Steve Ballmer, people who would become a crucial part of his company in later years. So even if the formal education itself is absolutely useless, something that we would in fact contend, what we would say in addition is that the networks people gain from being at education are important to them being able to exploit their ability to bring their ideas out into the world. So if you look at Mark Zuckerberg, look, this was a guy who topped his high school classics exams. He was also a guy who would apparently go around quoting the Iliad to everyone at parties. So kind of the guy that you wouldn't want to be stuck in a corner with. This was a guy who was very much embedded in the educational philosophy that was embedded within Harvard. Even if he dropped out, he was a man who was able to use that experience to drive his idea forward. Let's assume in the best case scenario for them that education puts people off becoming entrepreneurs themselves. The thing is, there's always going to be some people who want to go out there and make a difference to the world directly by founding their own company. And guess what those individuals need? They need people who are willing to not be the great disruptive innovator, but are also willing to be able to work for them. Because for everyone who goes and founds their own company, they also need a whole bunch of people who are willing to work for that company in order to make it a success. See the many thousands of people who work for companies like Microsoft and the hundreds of people who are involved in the relatively early stages of Facebook's development. In an educational environment, people are able to bounce ideas off each other amongst a number of incredibly smart individuals who are incredibly motivated. And the longer people are engaged in that educational process, the more likely they are to meet these individuals and be able to gain those ideas. Furthermore, in terms of the way that innovations are changing over time, we're seeing a movement towards ideas which rely upon some sort of technical knowledge or expertise. See the fact that a number of the entrepreneurial startups in Silicon Valley at the moment are tech companies or are companies within biomedical engineering. These are companies that rely on specialist knowledge, and in fact, even if you're the guy that is leading that company, you still need to have a deep understanding of how your product works and what is feasible in terms of marketing that. And that's knowledge that you're only able to get directly through having education.
As I see it simply, the question is, did we dream more inside our classrooms or did we dream more outside? I'll ask the second speaker for the proposition, Shirani Goswami from Jadavpur University, to air her views.
According to me, the current prevalent educational system is like a game of chess where every individual is a pawn in a master plan. And cultivation of entrepreneurial skills or ideas is neither the objective nor within the basic framework of our educational structure. Today's educational system, with its set-in-stone syllabus, with its unmalleable formulae, with its stereotypical modules, has no scope for development of innovative faculties. It stunts innovation, thereby stunting entrepreneurship altogether, and those imparting this education might be in this educational system for far too long to have the exposure to properly guide people who think off the beaten track, people who think out of the box. Secondly, another very basic thing that education does is at the primary level with standardized tests differentiate between right and wrong. So there is black and there's white, and the 50 shades of grey or more in the middle are simply ignored. So what it does is train an individual basically to be risk averse from fear of losing and never learn from one's mistakes and grow from there. Thirdly, the higher the level of education attained by individuals, the more the knowledge of organizational, bureaucratic, financial risks, and the more the intimidation by the same. Education, as it is prevalent today, seems to prompt individuals to aspire for this tailor-made life, the easy way out, without for once considering the possibility of a slump, of a downfall in life. The education system and the media also, to an extent, seem to be pushing for this social conformity whereby it is said that those who are better able seem to be opting for the professional, the better paid professional or academic careers, and those who do not conform to that social standard or that educational standard are the ones who choose to do business, whereby hitting at the basic morale, creating a sense of social inadequacy in aspiring entrepreneurs. What we require today is a drastic transformation in the educational system Going by dialectic materialism proposed by Karl Marx, every thesis has an antithesis which destroys the thesis, and only through a synthesis can a new thesis be formed, and that is the kind of drastic transformation that we require in today's educational system.
Thank you very much. The paradox of chess, of course, is that the pawns, at least when they start, can move 2 squares at a time. The king can always move only 1. Speaking against the motion from Scottish Church College, Shaumo Shekhar Gangopadhyay.
The speakers from the proposition today, they dug their own grave. When they contextualized the topic of education as formal education, they did not tell you what level of formal education they are talking about. Now, my sister goes to school and she's in UKG where she's being taught to write words like cow, dog, and house. That itself is formal education. Now, I cannot say that that education is killing her entrepreneurial spirit, because if I expect a 3-year-old to have an entrepreneurial spirit, I think I'm really asking for too much, in spite of the fact that I have Bengali parents. Even radical entrepreneurs like Richard Branson have to file their taxes on the 31st of March every year. They have to pay their employees on the 1st of every month. So regimentation is also a part of entrepreneurship. If you do not have regimentation, and if the animal spirit takes over, as we have seen in the case of a willful defaulter in our country itself, we usually call that animal spirit a mad dog, not an entrepreneur. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I guess we all know who we are talking about in a drunken frenzy. But the point is, you see, education, as my first speaker from the opposition said, it enhances entrepreneurship. Let me illustrate with an example. When Steve Jobs took out the Apple iPad and the whole range of Apple product, and the App Store was initiated, we had a whole new industry coming up, which was known as the applications industry. And that created a shortcoming, as there were not enough applications for a user to download. Today, every single startup which you see, whether it be a Paytm, whether it be a Flipkart, whether it be a ShopClues, is because of Steve Jobs' making of Apple and the Apple operating system. Now, you might tell me that Steve Jobs is somebody who went off the path, he was a dropout, and therefore his education would not be considered. But the fact is, you cannot say Steve Jobs never had a formal education, because a person cannot code in computer programming language without knowing how to code itself. So the priority of coding was his education. And when you're talking about formal education, then you have to tell me that what level of formal education are you actually saying kills off entrepreneurship? That you have to tell me then that it's in the 3rd year of my bachelor's that entrepreneurship in me was killed. Till 2nd year, it was very much alive. Now, do you realize how stupid that sounds? Ethics in business forms a very critical part of the life of an entrepreneur. He has to be ethical. There are certain other educational traits which he needs to have, and that itself forms the foundation on which his education is built on. Therefore, education becomes a prime important skill in his case of entrepreneurship.
Speaking next for the motion from Karachi University, Daniel Ali Wasim.
In order to answer the opposition first, I would say that when they're teaching his sister to write cow, do they also suspend the little girl when she draws something on the wall? Isn't this hampering her creativity? Isn't this hampering the innovation that could have helped? We are not saying that the 3-year-old is supposed to be reading books on entrepreneurship, but what we're trying to say is that it starts from the basic level. And I will start off with my point by first narrowing down what education is basically. So the thing is, this is becoming a very big problem. Education, what we are considering education as, is something that is now becoming a set of standardized methodical tests and nothing other than that. Coming down to my second point, what is entrepreneurship? We have discussed that already, but an entrepreneurship, someone who is a risk taker, who starts a business, who's an effectual thinker, and by just the last line, who believes in heads I win, tails I don't lose much, right? So, okay, so we're done with both the points. Now, what happens when education is killing entrepreneurship? How does that happen? I'll be focusing on conformity. Now, what is conformity? Conformity is when you basically restrict the creativity, the student or the subject has got. When you are basically trying to kill the thought process and you are making everyone do the same thing because that's the way it is done nowadays. This is the real problem here. Now, a lot of things that do come up with conformity are things like when you're taught to conform, basically what you need to understand is that for some reason, my thinking is being stunted. I am forced to think the way all others are thinking. When you're not taught to take mistakes, you do not bring the power of your thought process. What education nowadays is doing, it is killing the ingenuity, the innovation, the intellectual capacity, and everything else. The Torrance test to creative thinking, a test kind of thing, they recently published their report by saying that nowadays, we see students with less motivation, they're less talkative, they're less expressive, and everything bad. So do we really want an education system that's ending up with students who are all of these things? We also have this Robert Thiel program that I just recently got to know about. If education is so good and formal education is not a big deal and standardization of tests is absolutely okay, I'm assuming there won't be organizations, fellowship programs that actually tell you to, if you drop out from your high school, that's okay, come up, we'll pay for that and we'll help you be something. Moreover, my last point, when we are quoting people like Richard Branson or Steve Jobs or all those people who did make it into the Forbes list of billionaires but were dropouts, but what we're trying to say is that we could at least entertain these thoughts, this question that maybe, just maybe, there's something between the both, there's some link, some correlation between the both. I am not setting anything on stone. I am not giving you a formula in order to get billionaires, but what I'm trying to say is maybe, just maybe, their dropping out did have something to do with their success. I rest my case.
Niladri Sabir from Dhaka University, the North-South University in Dhaka.
Mr. Speaker, if I wasn't given education, instead of knowing about the business administration system and therefore studying it, I would probably be back at home learning how to make the same old Bangladeshi recipes. Same old because education in culinary arts would help the recipes evolve. But since education doesn't exist, evolution wouldn't have existed in the first place. Most people graduating from high school, they don't have any idea as to what they necessarily want. And without the knowledge of chemistry or biology or physics or calculus or anything, without the knowledge of the existence that there's a subject that I desire, they probably wouldn't have gone on to universities where they wanted to study in accordance to those subjects in the first place. But furthermore, we believe that according to their logic, if education does kill entrepreneurship, the people without the nation with the people with the lowest education literacy rate would have had the highest number of entrepreneurs. But do we see that in Bangladesh? Do we see that anywhere? Mr. Speaker, there are lots of educational institutes that actively work for keeping the job market afloat. There are many education institutes that keep employing people and keep updating the courses to maintain along with the demand in the market in itself. And it is this knowledge, this is how they create their entrepreneurs and their students in itself so that they can adjust to the market. Because if I start becoming a banker in Greece at the end of the day, I'll simply be broke. Entrepreneurship consists of budgeting. It consists of human resources. It consists of marketing in itself. And through these forms of education, I can simply understand which sector I am interested in and which sector I am not. And therefore, education furthers entrepreneurship because guess what? At the end of the day, everything is developing, and it is education itself that lets you catch up and not make mistakes from your own. Because history repeats itself, mistakes repeat themselves unless you are taught otherwise that don't make that mistakes to begin with. But furthermore, Mr. Speaker, we also believe that the accessibility of education brings about a personal incentive themselves. These institutes give you incentives, for example, making startup competitions for giving you the amount of money for the startup budget and capital that you need for a business. But furthermore, they also give you free money for pursuing entrepreneurship. But how does it evolve a personal incentive? This is where Francesca came up and she talked about the rebellious behavior, right? So you need to understand this, that true rebelliousness comes from being in a system that you can rebel. And what can I rebel at the end of the day? When I'm stuck in a classroom filled with people learning the same thing again and again, and each and every individual has a desire to be different. It is then that I get the desire to produce something which is incredibly different. This is the same desire that Mark Zuckerberg had come up with in order when he had come up with the idea of Facebook, right? But furthermore, the saturation of the market in itself makes people stand out. At the end of the day, we have heard, how did the Calcutta Debating Circle come up? It wasn't started up with a bunch of people who weren't educated. It started up with a bunch of people who were incredibly educated, but they wanted to make a difference because they're stuck in the same circle where they are in a monotonous life. At the end of the day, we tell you, education provides you that knowledge to be able to break out of the circle. But furthermore, if you don't, it gives you the platform, gives you the knowledge to go and invest where you're going to get lots of money.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're halfway through the debate. This House believes education kills entrepreneurship.